The average solo GP is dead. Being handcuffed to a practice that only makes money while you're drilling crushes your freedom. Being trapped at the office is no way to experience life. And doing more fillings and crowns ain't the answer to freedom. Stop it. Freedom comes when your practice makes money without you. Freedom is choosing how many days and how you dental. Ready to forge your freedom? Then keep listening to become a super GP and super CEO. This is the Titanium Practice Podcast with your host, Dr. Stephen Freeman. Let's go.
Hello, all you beautiful people, and welcome back to another episode of the Titanium Practice Podcast. I am your personal freedom coach and host, Dr. Stephen Freeman. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. So, we got Florida weather happening right now, which normally should be sunny, warm. And it's funny because when I grew up outside of Chicago, I remember at one point telling my wife, I was like, if it never got below 40 degrees, I'd be just as pleased as I could possibly be. Now that I've lived in Florida for almost 20 years now, I can tell you that if it gets below 60 degrees and it's not sunny outside, it ain't a great day. So it's funny how that perspective can change over time, and perspective is a pretty funny thing. But we're really not talking about perspective today, and we're not really talking about weather. What we are talking about is we've got another nugget episode. So I am going to bring you some tips, pearls, what I like to call nuggets of information from my most recent ebook, Forging Your Freedom. I'd encourage you to go right now, download it if you haven't already, just so that you could read over it. But these are some of the highlights and tips from that book, and those are also highlighted in the book as well, so you can find them pretty easily. And they are a great source of information on maybe some things you hadn't thought about. Maybe you've never heard them before. Today, I'm probably going to be focusing more on ones that you have heard before, but it's still a great way to potentially get your feet wet. We're going to be talking about the implants today, and this won't hit all of them, but I'm going to focus on the very beginning, and we'll get to the rest of it in other future podcasts here. But what I'm really kind of looking at is I want to see everyone get into the implant game. I've said before that I kicked, screamed, didn't want to do implants. I was scared of them. I was afraid of putting them into the sinus, which, by the way, I've taken thousands upon tens of thousands of cone beams at this time. And I can tell you pretty much any implant in the molar region has some type of communication into the sinus. And studies have actually shown that it doesn't actually make a difference if you do that or not. And actually all you really need to put into your notes is that you were trying to achieve bicortical stabilization when you were putting that implant in. But if you don't do that, and something goes awry, then maybe you can get yourself in a little bit of trouble. Just put that in your notes. And if you've got a computer, just put it in your auto notes and say, trying to achieve bicortical stabilization with implant if it's near the sinus at all. And that's it. It's like your ticket to get out of jail free card. It's wonderful. But at the same time, obviously, if we can try to avoid it, we can. But again, one of the things you can see on a cone beam is when there's infection in the sinus or if the sinus is really hating something. And I don't think I have seen an implant yet when they were probably trying to do a sinus lift at the same time of doing an implant of having any kind of infection associated with it. I've probably seen one, but again, I've looked at thousands and thousands of these in the maxillary molar site, and they don't care. And it makes sense because it's a sterile piece of metal that you're putting up there. There should be no reaction to it. It's kind of the whole point of using titanium. And so I'll say that right off the jump of just like, I was fearful of doing harm to the patient and doing something that I couldn't help out. I was fearful of putting an implant into a nerve. I was fearful of putting an implant into a tooth next to it. I was fearful of not knowing what it was going to feel like to place an implant. And I had my dad as my cheerleader, oral surgeon, cheering me on, telling me to do this. And so I'm going to do the same thing for all of you and say, you have to be doing this. It's easy to do. It is easy to do, okay? Now, that doesn't mean there aren't challenging ones out there. At the same time, you should be doing this. Your patients want you to be doing this. Your kids' college fund wants you to be doing this. So do it. It's pretty easy to do. So how are we going to get you in the game? How are we going to get you started doing this and believing me that these are pretty darn easy to do? And so where I start out in the book is talking about guided surgery. Oh man, just if you're scared about getting into the game, just do it guided. Because when you do it guided, it's brainless. It is absolutely brainless to do. And it is just a great way to actually get a feel for how bone feels differently than tooth. You get into doing it, you get the feel for it. There's definitely a feel in placing implants. I don't think there's much of a feel that I can really think of, and I'm trying to go back through my head and even think of, like, how does it feel to do a filling? How does it feel to do a crown? And for the most part, I can't really say that there's a feel to it. But once you start doing implants, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. You'll know exactly, what type of bone feels. You've got some dense bone feels different than softer bone, and so you know how to treat it. But you don't have to worry about that stuff at the beginning when you've got a guide. So in order to do a guide, what do you need? Well, you need a cone beam. You need a cone beam. And I wanted to actually include this in my general practice First Nuggets podcast episode that we did, because you have no idea until you've got a cone beam how much information that it gives you. I'm sure every one of you has had someone come in, has an emergency and says, this tooth hurts. Or they come in routinely and say, I know this tooth hurts. And you take a PA and you see nothing. Nothing's there. It drives you insane because you want to help the person. That's why you started doing this in the first place. You wanted to help the person. You want to be able to get them out of pain. You wanted to fix the problem. You don't want to be a medical doctor that just simply signs a prescription and sends the patient on the way. You want to fix the problem. But if you can't see what the problem is, you can't fix the problem. So how do you see the problem? A cone beam. A cone beam. The number of times that they come in and they say this tooth hurts, and they've been to a million different dentists, and all they do is they take an x-ray and they can't figure out what's going on with the tooth, and they've got a problem with it and they know that it hurts, and then you take a cone beam and bang! On the screen is this giant infection. I couldn't see it on my PA either. And now you can go back and look and be like, oh, there's the outline of it. But you don't know it until you can see it. It's amazing. It is absolutely amazing. The way we do it in my practice is I just give them away for free. I don't even mess with it. I don't want to mess with finding out if the insurance is going to pay for it. I don't want to mess around to find out if the patient's okay paying for it, because I know from experience now of the fact that I know that I'm going to be able to help this patient and I'm going to be able to get revenue out of the deal as well, because we know we're going to find the problem. So it helps the patient and it helps us, and it speeds the whole thing up. It just moves the process along and makes it significantly more efficient, and you'll be able to see problems you had no idea were there before. Because you know what's going to happen is almost assuredly you're going to take a cone beam of the mouth, you're going to look at that tooth, and if you're smart then, you'll take your little view box. So all of them come with their own software, but they all generally work about the same. And they got this, you'll be able to move a view box around something that basically looks like a pan, and it'll give you different cross sections of wherever that view box is sitting. And what you start to do is, if you look at that tooth and you say, holy cow, look at that gigantic infection associated with that tooth, it's fractured and it needs to come out, You take that view box and you go look at other teeth and you're like, uh-oh. We've got 2 or 3 other teeth to talk about too. You'd be amazed at the number of root canal treated teeth that just have massive lesions around them. Massive. I'm not talking about scar tissue at the apical portion of the tooth. I'm talking completely encapsulating the tooth. It is crazy the amount of information we get from this. And it is not currently the standard of care to place an implant with a cone beam. I think it absolutely will be someday, and I absolutely think it should be. But my dad placed implants for decades and never had a cone beam. He just simply used a little ball bearing that you put down in the lip, take a comb, take a normal pan, and then you basically just do some measuring and math, and off you go. So you can do it that way. You can. And that's the way I started. I said, if dear old dad will do it that way, I can do it too. And it worked. My biggest problem is that I had is I remember going in one day. John was the patient, and we were actually going to do a fixed bridge on top of him for implants, all on X, whatever you want to call it. And I remember looking in his mouth, and we had his models. We'd done the whole workup because we were going to do a conversion denture for him the same day, and I was all excited. I think this is one of my first ones. It was definitely towards the beginning. It wasn't definitely my first one, but it was one of the first ones we did. And I looked in his mouth, I looked at the models, just this giant ridge, just, bigger than your thumb. And I knew this was going to be pretty straightforward, and I was excited to do it. I got him numbed up, and I flapped him from stem to stern. And as I'm pulling the tissue back, I'm like, where's the bone? 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 He had just a knife edge ridge from stem to stern. And my heart sank. It just sank when it happened, because we had done all this lead up work. We had done, I numbed a patient and put a giant incision to his mouth. And I knew right then and there that I was not going to be able to do that surgery. I was not going to be able to place the implants. John was a great guy, very nice guy. He wasn't mad about it at all. He was just disappointed he wasn't going to be able to get a fixed bridge. And what he needed really was more block grafting to be done first and then come back. And that is not what this course or what the book is about, or what we're going to be talking about doing right now, which you absolutely can do. But I didn't know how to do that stuff at the time. I eventually learned how to do it, and I could have helped John when I got more skilled, but that was a number of years later by the time I had actually acquired that information. Then I lost touch with John, so we never did it. So I hope he ended up getting it. But my point to that was, and I don't encourage you at all to be starting with doing all-on X procedures. Please walk before you can run. But my point is I was sure, absolutely sure, this guy had an enormous amount of bone to be working with, and a great way to be getting your feet wet with doing all-on X. And then I looked and saw he had no bone at all. And so that was the moment that I decided that I was going to buy a cone beam, because I never ever wanted to be caught off guard again from doing it. I wanted to know what I was dealing with before I ever laid my hands on the patient. So that was it. That day I bought a cone beam. And so when I bought it, it was like $120,000 plus tax, and I always love the freight, where it's like $5,000 for freight. It was like, really? Did it really cost $5,000 to ship this thing here? And for a fact it didn't, but such is life. So today you can get them for a fraction of that price. And a lot of these places that sell used radiograph equipment, from just a normal tube head to these things, they're very reputable. So I'd encourage you to go find them, do your research on them, but there's a lot of good ones out there, and you can get these things for $35,000 now, which is less than what I paid for my digital pan when I first opened my office 16, 17 years ago at this point in time. So That's an absolute home run. When you put that onto a payment plan, it is literally pennies on the dollar for what you're going to learn and what you're going to be able to do for these patients, especially if you want to start doing endo, which again, you can learn how to do with our Forging Your Freedom book at titaniumpractice.com. Or if you just want to bring in, or if you start seeing enough of it and you want to bring in an endodontist to do it for you. It's an amazing amount that you miss without this information. So I would tell you, run, do not walk to getting a cone beam, because it will transform your entire practice. It is my number one, I guess I should say number two, because number one piece of equipment in the office is the phone. Nothing else happens without the phone. But as far as actual clinical dentistry is concerned, I cannot do what I do without a cone beam. And I'm sure a lot of you are saying, well, what about the handpiece? Yeah, whatever. But I can't know what to cut with that handpiece until I can see what it is that I need to cut. And for me, that cone beam is just that important. And I would never, ever start a practice without a cone beam. So now you can see what you're doing. Also, what you can do now is you can create a guide. Create a guide. So your guide is just like it sounds. So if you've never seen them before, and you probably have, but it's just this plastic tray that's going to go over the top of the teeth, and it's been set up specifically for your implant system. So there's a little, what you're going to want to get is what's called a keyless system. There are keyed systems out there, and they are a pain in the ass. Please do not get a keyed system. Get a keyless system. And I think most of the implant companies out there are doing that these days. But I was very disappointed to find out that when I first started, like the first guide I ordered for Zimmer was a keyed guide. And I'm like, what is this crap? You have to hold like this wand, which is the key, or it looks almost like a wrench that you're holding in place, and then you have your other hand you got the drill on it. Well, when you're trying to hold the lip out of the way and trying to see the angulation, it's terrible. It's just terrible. I was so angry that whole surgery, and I was like, what is this piece of crap that you sold me? And I immediately got then, I don't think Zimmer's keyless kit came out until a couple of years later. So make sure you have a keyless kit. They all work about the same. There's a lot of crossover with some of these implant systems. So for the longest time, I actually was placing MIS implants for a long time. And theirs was actually, then I went back and got their guide kit to place my Zimmer implants. And it's not an exact size correlation between the two of them, but enough of it that it actually worked very, very well. And it was keyless, and so it just made things so easy to do. So basically you put this thing that looks like a night guard with a hole in it, and it snaps over the top of the teeth. And if it doesn't snap on the teeth, then it wasn't made correctly, and you got a problem. So the first thing you would do when you bring the patient back for that appointment for the placement of the implant, try the guide in first, please. 99% of the time they're going to fit, but God, if you get them numbed up and the thing doesn't fit, you look like a schmuck. So don't look like a schmuck. Try the thing in before you get them numb. Make sure that it fits. And obviously your assistant can do that. Just stick it in the mouth. Make sure that it fits nicely. It has stops on it, little spots that should fit right over the top of the teeth. And so it should fit snugly over the top of the teeth. It should go to those stops and stop. And that's it. It fits perfectly. So from there then, you know it fits. You get them numb. When I numb for implants, and when I numb for anything, I never block. I haven't done a block in, I don't know, we'll say 7 years again. I don't know. It's probably been longer than that. I do not block. And we'll go into a couple more reasons why for that in the future. But honestly, all I do is you're going to be doing a tissue punch here. So again, if you don't know what a tissue punch is just a cylinder. And you just run it at like 1,000 RPM, and you just put it through your key for into the guide, and you're going to plug a tissue out. And it would be nice if it worked out exactly that way. But all you're doing is I use each of your systems will come with a particular sized tissue punch, But I just literally go right to the spot where we're going to be punching and place a little bit of anesthetic. Just a touch. It barely gets down to that first line on the anesthetic cartridge, and that's all you need. That's it. That's all you need. Real quick pinch. That's it. It's great. So then you put the guide back in, run your handpiece, punch the tissue, and then it would be amazing if you got there a little plug of tissue out every time, and you're probably not. But then what I do is I take the guide back out, and I put the punch back into the mouth, into the spot, and you got to push hard. You push hard and warn the patient you're going to do that, because they don't like it, especially when it's on the bottom. But just warn them, hey, I'm going to push real hard real quick. You push real hard, and you should now have scored this thing down enough to the bone that you can grab a quick periosteal and pop the plug out. That's it. Now you're looking at bone. And then your system will have the steps. And if you're only doing a premolar or an anterior tooth, you may only run 3 drills into this thing. And you need to run them a little bit slower than you would if you were freehanding this. And the reason for that is because the glue holding the little cylinder in that you'll see you can overheat that glue and cause that little ring to come out. And all of a sudden your guide's absolutely useless. So I tend to run them more at like 650 RPM and make sure your irrigation is on. And make sure your irrigation is on when you tissue punch as well, because you can do the same thing. You don't want to overheat that glue and cause that little ring to pop out. When I normally tissue punch, if I'm freehanding, I don't run the water. And it's not that big of a deal, but there's almost always a national shortage for this water these days, and it's crazy. So it's not even a cost thing. It's just the less you can use, awesome, that you don't have to order it as often and find out that it's on back order. So you punch it, and you're going to just run the drills up there into it. And it's idiot proof. You cannot put it sideways, or wrong ways, sideways, whatever ways you want to call it. It's got to go up and down, or else you're not going to be able to go to your depth. So I use Implant Concierge to help make my guides. They're about $305, so they're pretty expensive. We'll get into it again in another time, and it'll be another podcast, but I am getting a 3D printer, and I'm super excited about it. And it will bring the cost down to have someone else design it, but me print it, it's going to be about $100. So that's pretty cool, of the fact that I'll be able to bring down the price $200 for these guides. But they do a nice job, and then you'll have a quick phone call with them to say, hey, what do you think about this position? You want a more buccal, lingual, whatever. The ladies there are very knowledgeable, very knowledgeable. Can't recommend them highly enough. It is a tad expensive. I wish it was a little cheaper than that. And you pay per site. So it's like $300 for one site. And then if you want another site, it's another like $20 or something like that. I don't remember the exact numbers. But the point is the bulk of it is just going to be one site anyway. So add on as many as you want. But I will not place more than 2 implants in an arch without a guide. I always guide them if I'm going to do more than 2 implants in an arch. And I am, honestly, even when I wrote the book, I wasn't as big of a fan as guide is, and I am now becoming a much bigger fan of it. Why not? Because of the cost of the patient? Well, I mean, we want these things to go in exactly where they're supposed to be. And if you can basically turn yourself into a robot and place this thing, you're doing the best thing for the patient. So why not do the best thing for the patient? But you got to have a cone beam to do it. And then you've got to talk to the patient about doing it. Okay? So right now, a lot of the insurance companies don't have a great reimbursement for this. And so we do an extra lab cost, which you're allowed to do, but you have to present it to the patient. You have to tell them it's above and beyond their insurance fee, and they have to sign off of it on the treatment plan. But we normally charge about $500 for a guide. But the reimbursement from the insurance is typically closer $50, $100, because I think what they're trying to get coverage for is just making a suck down on a model. This is not a suck down on a model. This is rigid. It's a very robust system to make sure that your implant is going exactly where it needs to go. If you do a suck down on a model as your guide, there's too much wiggle room. There's way too much wiggle room doing it. I understand why some people do that. I think those are an utter waste of time, in my opinion. If you're going to guide it, do it right, and you will crush it. And then you will get a feeling of how these feel of putting them into place. And you may never want to go away from that. But the vast, vast majority of mine, I freehand. But I'm coming back around again to where I started. Of just, why not? It's the best thing for the patient. Guide it. Great. So let's guide it. Let's put it in, pay a little bit extra, and off we go. But that would be the way I'd encourage you to get into placing implants, is to just simply guide these into place. It's so easy to do. And you're welcome to practice on whatever you'd like to do. Go buy a bone from the store and just have any old guide made or whatever and just try seeing how it feels. But there's nothing that's going to tell you truly how it feels until you actually do it on a patient. And if you use a guide, you're not going to mess it up because you have done all of your homework and your prep on that phone call with Implant Concierge. Because we have now put it into the exact spot that it's supposed to go. And when you're done, you're going to look at it and be like, that was so easy. I can't believe I haven't been doing these sooner. And that is where freedom comes from. All of a sudden, now you're going to, if you guide it, honestly, guided ones take me a little bit longer to do than freehanding them. But you will be doing those in about 10 minutes. You'll be placing an implant in about 10 minutes because there's just not that many things to do. Because when you freehand it, your first drill is your most important. So you got to nail your pilot. Just absolutely nail it. And if you nail your pilot, then it's boom, boom, boom. But taking that guide in and out sometimes takes a little bit of time if that's what you end up doing it, if you give the patient a break or things like that. But you can absolutely do a guided implant in 10 minutes without thinking twice about it because of the fact you've already done your homework. And that phone call of about 10 or 15 minutes with the people at Implant Concierge, you've done your homework. You've done your setting up of your pilot drill, and that pilot is the most important part about doing your implant. And then you just go to depth because there's a stop on it. And that little ring stops you from going any further. And you go bang, 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 and that's it, and you're done. And you've done an implant, and that portion of it just for the actual implant is about $2,000 in a fraction of the time that it took you to do a Class 2 composite or even a crown. Because hell, your assistant's going to take a half hour making the temporary for a crown anyways. Wouldn't it be nice to have an implant done and out the door? We still schedule an hour for it. And it drives me nuts because I know I can do them faster. We used to schedule it for less amount of time. But we schedule it for an hour just to make sure they don't have any questions and talk to them and blah, 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 blah. But absolutely, as far as your time being in the room, it's going to be about 10 minutes because you're numbing one little spot. That tissue numbs almost instantly. You already know the guide fits before you walk in. Bang, 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 implants in, take your x-ray, get them out the door. That's it. That's all you need to do. Okay? So those are just some quick nuggets for you on getting started with implants, of what you can expect with the guide, what you should do with the guide, how you should use the guide, things like that. And I hope you do venture on over to titaniumpractice.com to get your copy of Forging Your Freedom. And that's all I got for you today, okay? Thank you so much for joining me, and I am truly dedicated to your freedom. So if you need anything, please reach out to us at titaniumpractice.com. And I look forward to talking to you guys again on another podcast, all right? Have a great day. Thanks. Bye.
You've been listening to the Titanium Practice Podcast with your host, Dr. Stephen Freeman. Please hit the like and subscribe button and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Titanium Practice. Questions or comments? Send an email to info@titaniumpractice.com. Join us next time to help turn your average practice into a titanium practice.